Before today's video, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the latest videos. If you want to see a case or topic covered by Paranormally Listed, then go to criminallylisted.com and fill out the questionnaire under the Suggest a Case tab. With shows and video games like The Walking Dead and The Last of Us, and not to mention our own very real COVID-19 pandemic, the thoughts of viruses and outbreaks hasn't been very far from our collective minds. But a zombie outbreak can't really happen, can it? Well, there are a few ways in which scientists have studied zombification in nature and hypothesized how this could eventually leap to humans. Let's take a look at 3 ways a zombie outbreak might happen. Number 3. Rage virus. Some symptoms generally associated with zombies are aggressive behavior, anxiety, hallucinations, and paralysis. And those symptoms are actually shared with a current, very real disease, rabies. Rabies is a virus that affects the central nervous system and can cause erratic and violent behavior. But that doesn't happen often, right? Since the most common way for rabies to be transmitted is through an animal's bite, and since so many pets are vaccinated early for rabies, there are very few cases of the virus anymore. However, viruses can mutate and change, and they can bypass the immunity provided to us through vaccines. We've seen it happen with various variants during the COVID-19 pandemic. New variants bypass the immunity offered by existing vaccines. One theory for how rabies could develop into a pandemic status would be if rabies were transmitted through the air rather than a bite, and if it mutated enough to evade our vaccinations. The question is, how would this change things? Well, we would get something like the rage virus, like in 28 days later and 28 weeks later. It would spread much more easily since direct contact is no longer necessary, and simply breathing it in through the air would be enough to contract the virus. Secondly, if it were to mutate to evade our current vaccines, there would be no immediate medication to cure it. Together, this would lead us to a zombie apocalypse. The question that needs to be asked about this scary possibility is, can a virus like rabies be engineered to affect humans to this level? Samita Andreski, a virologist at the University of Miami, says there is a hypothetical chance that a disease like rabies could mutate into a disease that could cause the rage virus. However, it would need to borrow several characteristics from other already existing viruses. It would take making the virus airborne, like flu viruses, then having it change people's behaviors, like the measles virus. It would then need to make the person develop a high temperature in their brain, like encephalitis, and then finally something to make you bleed, like Ebola. Together, these symptoms will lead to what we commonly associate with zombies and their condition. However, she doesn't think that something like this would happen. She said nature doesn't allow all these things to happen simultaneously. Ultimately, these different viruses are genetically distinct, meaning rabies and influenza won't hybridize to share characteristics. So we're safe from airborne rabies, and the hypothetical rage virus will stay hypothetical. For now. Number 2. Prions. Next, we're going to get a little sciencey and talk about something we're sure the average person hasn't heard of, prions. So, to break it down, bodies need protein. Proteins are folded in a certain way and have different amino acids. And all proteins have specific functions for the body. However, there are times when proteins are not shaped correctly and thus cannot function properly in a person's body. This is even more dangerous if it's a PRP protein. When it's in the incorrect shape, it becomes a proteinaceous infectious particle, which is also known as, yep, you guessed it, a prion. Are we all sciencey smart now? Then this prion causes other proteins to be misshapen, and those proteins affect other proteins, etc., etc. This causes a disease called transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. or simply prion disease. Ultimately, this gives the brain a sponge-like look due to there actually being holes in the brain, like a sponge. In a Vox article, they describe prions as the zombie-like pathogenic proteins that aren't alive and can't be killed. And, scarily enough, that Vox article discussed a real-life case of prions taking over brains. The disease is referred to as chronic wasting disease and is found in deer, elk, reindeer, and moose. When an animal is infected with this disease, they begin to have hallucinations, they begin to show signs of dementia, and they also have difficulty walking. It's called chronic wasting disease because the animal also stops eating and becomes so thin that they waste away. The virus is spread through several different forms of contact. For example, the disease can be transmitted through contact with an infected animal's fecal matter or blood. The scary aspect of this illness is that the animal can be infected for years without showing any symptoms, and in that time it can spread the disease to others. Not only that, but the only way to diagnose the disease is through cutting into the brain, something we can only do after the animal has passed away. Up until now, this particular disease has only been transmitted from animal to animal, not to humans. In fact, there was a case in 2005 where people ate venison infected with CWD. Many who consumed the meat participated in a study to see if they would eventually start showing symptoms. The good news is that none of them contracted the illness. So maybe we're safe from the wasting disease. However, experiments have been conducted to see if prions with CWD can infect human cells in a petri dish, and it turns out they can, so there's no knowing what the future may hold. In an article for Popular Science entitled, "Could Scientists Really Create a Zombie Virus?" the question is raised on how prion infections can be weaponized to create a zombie pandemic, if, you were evil. The prion is considered the best means to begin a zombie apocalypse because of how they infect the brain and how difficult they are to destroy, and because there's no cure to end their destruction. They further contend that the simplest way to spread the disease would be to attach it to an already established virus, something contagious. The only downside to this villainous plan is once the prion starts, it doesn't stop. They posited in this article that you don't want the zombies to become lethargic and die. The solution is to raise the pH, as this would render it difficult for the prions to reproduce. That way you would have people in a zombie-like state without everyone dying off easily. I guess we just outlined how you, at home, can start a zombie pandemic. Luckily, this is way too hard to do. Number 1. Fungus. If you're familiar with The Last of Us, then it's likely that a bloater or a runner has haunted your dreams more than once. And believe it or not, the zombie outbreak of The Last of Us was based on a real method in which ants are zombified. Ants are zombified by fungus, and in this case, it wouldn't be a fungi. Get it? Fungi? Okay, bad joke. Back to the facts. The fungus is called cordyceps. This is how it works. Basically, the ant comes into contact with a fungus, which is called a fungal spore. The ant probably doesn't even notice, and that's the creepiest part of the whole thing. The fungus seeps into the ant and begins to grow. And this fungus is smart. It pushes into the ant's muscles. The fungus isn't only physical, it also sends a message to the brain, which forces the ant to leave the nest. Then, find a nearby plant and climb it. Then the ant bites down on the leaf, causing its jaw to lock, and then the ant dies. But the fungus isn't done yet. Not only is the dead ant stuck on the leaf, but a stalk emerges from the ant's head and releases spores on the ground. I know what you're wondering. Why does the location matter? And why would it keep the ant alive all that time? Well, the fungus may not be a fun guy, but it is a smart guy. Ants live in colonies, and if an ant shows signs that they're not well, the rest of the ants will attack it. They do so to avoid spreading disease or illness to the rest of the colony. So in order to infect as many ants as possible, the ant has to show no signs of illness while the fungus grows inside of it. Then it has to leave once it shows signs of illness. So the fungus has figured out a way to grow inside the ant and then kill off the ant when it's done with the ant's body. However, the fungus has found a way to live beyond the ant's body by spreading the spores after the ant dies. Interestingly, some scientists are trying to grow cordyceps. We're sure you're wondering what we're wondering. Why? Well, it turns out that although it can turn ants into zombies, it also has medicinal and healing properties. Scientists are looking at cordyceps to see how it would work as an antiviral medication, how it could fight cancer, and even help with COVID-19. And this is not the only time zombification in nature can serve medical needs. Two other fungi that are being researched are called Strongwell C. trignea and Strongwell C. erosea, and they infect the fly species called Ceranosia trignea and Ceranosia testacea. The fungus, in this case, eats the fly's abdomen. However, as the fungus grows inside the fly continues to fly around. While the flies continue with their business, the fungus creates orange spores that follow the holes in the abdomen. The fly survives for days and spreads the fungus around, inevitably infecting other flies. So much like the ants releasing spores after their death, the fly continuously releases spores while it's still alive and flying around. This allows maximal fungal spread. The zombie fly doesn't even realize that their body has been taken over for nefarious purposes. However, this fungus can also be studied to see how it can be used medically. Researchers have found that the holes in the abdomen aren't infected by other pathogens during the period the fly is still alive and moving. This has led researchers to hypothesize that this fungus may have antimicrobial properties. So maybe there's something we can use for good from zombifying fungus. The good news is that none of these potential zombie outbreaks that appear in nature have already seen a jump to humans. And the other good news is that some of the fungi that have the ability to zombify insects also may serve human medical needs. The bad news is who knows what's going to happen. We're not saying a zombie outbreak is absolutely going to happen. We're just saying that when we played The Last of Us, not knowing it was based on a real thing, we found relief in thinking it was all made up. Now that we know there exists a basis in reality for all these potential outbreaks, even though they haven't quite made the leap to humans, we're definitely more freaked out than we ever were before. Take whatever you want from this video. We guess and hope that rabies don't go airborne, that prions don't connect to an established illness, and that these fungi serve good for humanity, rather than inhibiting us to spread spores. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. If you did find it interesting, please make sure you subscribe. We'll have a new video about the paranormal every week. If you just discovered this channel, please make sure you check out our other channel, Criminally Listed. We have over 325 videos featuring bizarre but true crime stories. You can find it at youtube.com/criminallylisted. We also have a podcast about cold cases that were eventually solved called Criminally Listed Presents Into the Killing. You can find it on Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and anywhere you find great podcasts. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.